They laughed when a broke veteran accepted a ruined mountain home, unaware that his dog sensed a truth worth $250 million buried beneath its rotting floors. On a sweltering July afternoon in the hills above Asheville, Ethan Ward stood alone on the roadside, with nothing left but his worn gray plaid shirt, a battered rucksack, and Ranger, the German shepherd who had once dragged him away from death in Fallujah. He believed life had finally beaten him. But the moment they reached the decaying estate, Ranger halted at the threshold, growling at the sun-bleached floorboards as if listening to something hidden deep below. And when the wood shifted under Ethan's boots, he understood the house wasn't a curse after all. It was a message sealed in wartime secrecy, and it was about to change everything. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. The July air hung thick and unmoving over the edge of Asheville, the kind of summer heat that pressed against the skin like a heavy hand. Ethan Ward, 55 years old with the weathered build of a man forged in long campaigns overseas, stood on the porch of his small cabin, tucked between whispering pines. His gray plaid shirt clung to his shoulders, damp with sweat, while the worn brown leather jacket he usually favored lay abandoned on a hook inside. The sun glinted off strands of silver in his short, close-cropped hair, and a thin scar along his jaw twitched whenever his thoughts drifted too far into the past. Ranger lay at his feet, the German shepherd's coat a striking mix of black along the spine and copper around the chest and legs, with a faint gray shading along the muzzle that hinted at early age. The dog was strong-bodied, about 6 years old, alert and loyal, yet carrying a quiet gravity in his amber eyes, an expression Ethan recognized too well. They had seen the same battles, though Ranger had joined his life later, not as a military dig, but as a rescue from a shelter where Ethan had once volunteered in a desperate attempt to reconnect with something living. The morning had started like any other, with Ethan nursing a cup of bitter coffee while scanning the tree line for no clear reason other than habit. After returning from the Marines, he had chosen solitude deliberately. He carried the memories of Fallujah like stones in his pockets, memories of men he lost, mistakes he couldn't rewind, and the lingering belief that he had walked out of the war a slightly haunted version of himself. Asheville had been quiet enough, gentle enough, and forgiving enough to let him breathe again, even if the night still wove shadows across his sleep. When the mail truck crunched along the gravel path, Ethan thought little of it. Bills, advertisements, maybe the notice reminding him that the workshop he rented in town would soon raise its fees again. He repaired engines for a living, lawn mowers, chainsaws, occasional motorcycles. Small work for small money, but steady enough to keep him and Ranger fed. But when he tore open the envelope addressed in crisp black ink, the air seemed to thicken around him. The letterhead belonged to a law office in Charlotte. The message was brief, formal, and impossibly strange. A distant relative, distant enough that Ethan could barely summon a name, had passed away, leaving behind a property on the outskirts of the Blue Ridge. A property that, according to the letter, he was the sole inheritor of. Ethan reread every word twice, then a third time. "No damn way," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck with a roughened hand. He had never received anything from anyone, not in this life. Ranger lifted his head at the sound of Ethan's voice, ears pricking forward. "Don't look at me like that," Ethan murmured. "Someone must have mixed up the paperwork." But then he noticed the final line, written not in the printed formality of the rest of the document, but in neat, deliberate handwriting, curved strokes, old-fashioned lettering, for the one brave enough to look beneath the surface. The words did not belong in legal communication. They belonged in riddles, in warnings, in secrets left behind by people who feared their truth would disappear with them. Ethan sat heavily on the steps, the wood creaking beneath his weight. He remembered stories his father once mumbled after too much whiskey, stories about old branches of the family, men who worked odd government jobs in the 1940s, women who disappeared from recorded history, a relative who lived like a recluse in the mountains and never answered letters. Ethan had dismissed them all as drunken nostalgia, but now he studied the letter again, feeling something shift inside him. Not excitement, not hope, something quieter, an opening in the fog, a tug deep in the chest, the feeling a man gets when a long-closed door finally nudges ajar. Ranger stood and leaned against Ethan's leg, tail low but gently waving. The dog sensed moods the way others sensed weather, and Ethan was grateful for it. "Don't worry," he said softly. "We'll check it out. Worst case, it's an empty shed falling off a cliff." He tried to chuckle, but the sound came out thin. He folded the letter carefully, more carefully than he wanted to admit. Something in him resisted crumpling it, or dismissing it outright. He had lived too many years convinced nothing new could happen to him. Nothing unexpected, nothing meaningful, nothing that might reroute the slow drift of his life. And yet, here it was. A stranger's property. A handwritten message. And a name, his name, chosen for reasons unknown. The heat wavered across the yard, bending the light around the trees until it looked like the air itself held its breath. Ethan stood, slipped the letter into his pocket, and whistled for Ranger. "Come on, buddy," he said. "Let's see what kind of trouble the universe has cooked up this time." But as he started back inside to gather his things, Ranger paused on the threshold, hackles lifting ever so slightly. Not in fear, but in that eerie, instinctive way dogs notice what humans miss. Ethan frowned. "What is it?" Ranger's gaze held steady, focused, as if the dog already sensed that this journey was not about inheritance at all, but about something buried far deeper, something waiting for them in the Blue Ridge shadows. And Ethan, following Ranger's eyes, felt the first whisper of a truth he wasn't yet ready to understand, a truth that was already moving toward him. The drive into the Blue Ridge pulled Ethan Ward steadily away from the familiar world he had clung to for years, the afternoon sun turning the winding mountain road into a ribbon of gold. His old pickup rattled, as though complaining with every mile, yet Ranger sat tall in the passenger seat, the German shepherd's ears forward, his copper and black coat catching slanted beams of light. Ethan drove in silence, gripping the wheel a little too tight. He wasn't afraid of what he might find, at least that's what he told himself. But the heat in his chest wasn't just from July weather. It was the discomfort of knowing his life was shifting without his permission. When the estate finally appeared through the trees, it rose out of the forest like a skeleton of stone and memory. The house was far larger than Ethan expected. A gray stone mansion built in the early 20th century, shaped with steep gables and tall, narrow windows framed by fractured panes. Moss clung to the mortar lines, and the iron balcony on the second floor sagged under decades of rust. The place looked abandoned long before he was born, and yet it held a stern, almost regal presence, as if daring the world to underestimate it. Ethan stopped the truck at the edge of a gravel courtyard as overrun with weeds. Ranger jumped out first, nose low, tail stiff. The dog's instincts sharpened with a tension Ethan didn't yet understand. "Easy," Ethan murmured, stepping out. His boots sank slightly into the soft earth, and he scanned the house with a mechanic's eye, assessing, questioning, cataloging stress points. But beneath that practical instinct, something else tugged at him. Some forgotten thread tied to the letter and the mysterious handwriting. The front door resisted before giving way with a heavy sigh, sending dust drifting like pale smoke. Inside, the air smelled of dry timber and cold stone. The foyer stretched outward, its ceiling arched and shadowed. A tarnished chandelier hung crookedly, its crystals dulled by age. Ethan swept his flashlight across the walls, revealing peeling wallpaper patterned with vines and flowers, long faded. Ranger padded ahead into what must once have been a grand living room. The dog's paws stirred old ash from a stone fireplace that rose nearly to the ceiling. Ethan's beam landed on a painting above it, an oil portrait of a stern-looking man in a dark suit, high cheekbones and intense gray eyes. The brass plaque beneath the frame read, "Thomas Whitford, 1937. The name meant nothing to Ethan, but the stare felt familiar, the way certain photographs and military memorials lingered like unfinished conversations. He continued exploring, stepping carefully through rooms that collapsed into one another like chapters in a forgotten book. The kitchen lay at the back of the house, sun-bleached and hollowed out by time. Cabinets hung lopsided, and a metal sink, once polished, had turned the color of old coins. Ranger's sudden growl broke the stillness. Ethan froze. "What is it, boy?" The dog scraped at the floorboards beside the counter, claws clicking sharply. His nose pressed low, his body taut. Ethan crouched and brushed away dust, revealing a set of scuffed boards arranged differently from the rest. A patch that didn't belong. "Something under here," Ethan murmured. His pulse thudded harder. He pried the boards loose with the flathead screwdriver he always kept in his pocket. The wood lifted with a reluctant crack, releasing a stale draft from below. A circular opening appeared, and at the center, an iron spiral staircase descending into darkness. Ethan stared, throat tightening. This wasn't a cellar built for wine or storage. The metalwork was industrial, reinforced, and surprisingly intact. Ranger sniffed at the entrance, ears pinned cautiously back. "If we're going down there," Ethan whispered, "let's hope it's not snakes." He swung his legs over the edge and began the descent, one creaking step at a time. Ranger followed without hesitation. The air below was cool and faintly metallic, lit only by Ethan's flashlight. The so-called basement unveiled itself slowly, concrete walls thick enough to withstand explosions, metal bunk beds bolted to the ground, shelves lined with decades-old canned rations, and a water pump system rusty but recognizable from wartime engineering manuals Ethan once studied. This was no ordinary basement. It was a wartime shelter, a bunker. And then the beam of light caught something at the far end, something massive, rectangular, and unmistakably secure. A vault door. Its steel surface, long untouched, bore embossed markings in faded military font. Operation Hearthstone, property of U.S. Treasury, 1943. Ethan's stomach dropped. Why the hell would this be here? He approached slowly, fingertips grazing the cold metal. Ranger sat beside him, silent but alert. The vault loomed in front of them like a sealed question, its edges lined with thick bolts, its combination dial locked at 0. And though Ethan couldn't explain it, a presence settled around them, not threatening, but waiting. Behind him, a faint creak rippled through the bunker, wood shifting above, or wind, or something else altogether. Ethan turned sharply, heart pounding. Ranger's ears snapped upward. Something, or someone, was in the house above them. And whatever it was, it didn't want them down here. Ethan stood before the vault door in the dim bunker, his breath slow and deliberate as he knelt to inspect the locking mechanism. The wheel was thick steel, dulled by decades of dust, but the structure itself was engineered with wartime precision. He had seen vaults like this only in classified manuals during his Marine years, rare, overbuilt, designed to survive even if the world above didn't. Ranger hovered close, the German shepherd's muscles coiled, his amber eyes glued to the dark corners of the room, as if expecting something to emerge from them. Ethan pressed his ear against the metal, fingers grazing the seams, mind drifting into the familiar calm that used to steady him during high-pressure operations. He had no proper tools, only intuition and the mechanical sense wired into him after years repairing engines and diffusing tension in hostile streets. He rotated the wheel slowly. Beneath the layers of rust, the vault gave a faint click, almost shy. Ethan tried the wheel again, feeling the resistance soften in subtle increments, each motion awakening pieces of machinery long asleep. Ranger let out a low rumble as if encouraging him. "Easy, buddy," Ethan murmured. "If this thing blows up, we'll both feel it." But there was no explosive snap, only the deep internal groan of ancient bolts retracting. Finally, with one final push of his weight, the vault swung open, its hinges moaning like a warning pulled from the past. The stale air that drifted out smelled of metal, oil, and time locked away. Ethan lifted his flashlight, and his breath hitched. Inside the vault, meticulously stacked from wall to wall, were rows of gold bars, each thick, stamped with Fort Knox 1942, their burnished surfaces catching the light in muted glints, not shiny, not dramatic, just quietly, dangerously real. Ranger sniffed the air and sat as if guarding something sacred. Ethan swallowed hard. "This is impossible," he whispered. His mind raced. How could his family, whoever this distant relative had been, have been entrusted with something like this? But there was more. On a metal shelf near the back lay a weathered ledger bound in cracked black leather. Ethan picked it up carefully, flipping through brittle pages filled with neat, disciplined handwriting. Names, numbers, coordinates. A title across the first page read, "Operation Hearthstone, Logistics Record, 1943. Ethan scanned the entries and felt the hairs on his neck rise. It detailed a secret piece orchestrated during World War II, a covert operation designed to divide and hide portions of the national gold reserves across secure, undisclosed shelters throughout the U.S., a safeguard in case the mainland was attacked. Halfway down the pages, he found the signature, Arthur Whitford, OSS Field Custodian. So, the stern-eyed man in the portrait upstairs was no ordinary landowner. He had been part of the precursor organization to the CIA, tasked with protecting one of the nation's most precious assets. And now that responsibility, intended or not, had shifted onto Ethan. He took a single gold bar, heavy, shockingly dense, feeling the cold weight seep into his arm, the kind of weight that could change a life for better or worse. He closed the vault and climbed the spiral staircase with Ranger close behind. The house above felt eerily silent, as though it were waiting. Ethan cast one last glance toward the portrait of Thomas Whitford, suddenly noticing how the man's painted gaze seemed calmer now, as if relieved. By the time Ethan reached his cabin back in Asheville, dusk had collapsed into night. The drive had been long and filled with quiet tension. Ranger jumped out first, circling the cabin with brisk sweeps, nose alert. Ethan stepped inside expecting ordinary stillness, but the air felt disturbed, the faint scent of sweat, dust displaced in unnatural patterns. His instincts tightened sharply. He flicked on the light. The living room appeared unchanged at first glance, but the details shattered the illusion. The front drawer of the old cedar dresser left ajar, a jacket tossed on the floor, though Ethan never left things out of place. The cupboard door near the window cracked open, and then he saw it. His duffel bag unzipped, its contents scattered. Ethan's pulse hammered. He knelt quickly, rifling through the inner pocket where he had stored the gold bar wrapped in a scrap of cloth. It was gone. Ranger growled, the sound low and fierce, his body angled toward the back door. Ethan followed the dog's line of sight and noticed something else, a footprint on the wooden floor near the entryway. A man's boot, larger than Ethan's. The sole pattern was deep and angular, the kind made for tactical terrain, not casual hiking. Someone had been here, someone who knew exactly what to look for. Ethan clenched his jaw. He had seen this kind of breach before, in war, in raids, in moments when the enemy was already ahead of the game. Someone out there knew about the vault, the gold, and possibly Operation Hearthstone, and they were close. Too close. He turned off the lights, letting Ranger circle the room again. The dog's rigid posture made something cold crawl down Ethan's spine. "We're not alone in this," he whispered. Through the window, the night pressed close. Somewhere outside, a twig snapped. The night settled over Asheville like a dark sheet of glass, smooth and silent until the moment Ethan stepped outside with Ranger and saw the pair of headlights lingering at the far end of the gravel road. The beams were too steady, too deliberate to belong to a passing traveler. He narrowed his eyes, his pulse tightening. The vehicle was a black SUV, broad frame, tinted windows, the type built for intimidation rather than comfort. Ranger stiffened immediately, the German Shepherd's ears pricked and body angled forward, a low warning hum vibrating in his chest. Ethan whispered, "Stay close." His voice was steady, but a burned-in instinct had already kicked open inside him. He had felt this sensation in war zones, the moment when shadows became predators. He stepped back into the cabin, grabbed his worn leather satchel, and stuffed the Operation Hearthstone ledger inside. He debated taking the envelope from the law firm as well, but his gut told him to move now and analyze later. As he extinguished the lights, the SUV crept closer, rolling to a silent stop in front of his property. Two figures stepped out. The first man was tall, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped black hair and a clean-shaven jaw carved in sharp angles. Even from the distance, Ethan could see his posture, rigid, authoritative, the kind of man shaped by command structures. The second man was leaner, wiry, with a sandy beard cropped short and restless eyes that scanned everything with mechanical precision. His shoulders slouched slightly, not from shyness but from habit, someone accustomed to slipping past notice. Both wore dark utility jackets and tactical boots. No badges, no insignias. Ethan whispered to Ranger, "They're not here to negotiate." Ranger's growl deepened, vibrating against Ethan's leg. The dog stood like a coiled spring. The tall man spoke first, voice cool. "Lights just went out. He knows we're here." "Good," the wiry man replied. "Makes this quicker." His tone held a dry, almost emotionless edge, someone who had learned to bury empathy a long time ago. Ethan slipped toward the back door, moving with the silent precision drilled into him during years of combat operations. Ranger followed, pause, whisper quiet on the wooden floor. The two of them disappeared behind the cabin, melting into the dark tree line. The forest swallowed them instantly. Thick pines hunched over the earth like sleeping giants. And the summer air, usually warm and heavy, had cooled with the descent of night. Ethan guided Ranger deeper into the shadows, avoiding twigs, moving along the leaf-packed soil. Behind them, he heard the intruders enter the cabin, heavy footsteps, drawers being yanked open, metal clattering onto wooden floors. Ethan made his way uphill toward the old mountain estate. He needed high ground, and more importantly, he needed the tunnel he discovered earlier. Its existence had unsettled him, but now it could be their only escape. As they moved, the woods rustled behind them, not wind. Steps, one pair, then a second. Flashlights cut through the trees like blades. The men had followed faster than Ethan expected. Ranger pressed close, every muscle burning with readiness. "Just like old times," Ethan murmured. "Only difference is you're smarter than half the squad I used to run with." They pushed harder, climbing the slope until the estate loomed ahead, its silhouette jagged against the sky. Ethan entered through a back door hanging loosely on a single hinge, then crossed the dusty kitchen to the hidden floorboards. Ranger paced anxiously beside him as Ethan lifted the boards and gestured to the gaping darkness below. The spiral stairs groaned under their descent. When they reached the bunker, Ranger darted ahead, circling anxiously near the far wall. Ethan switched on his flashlight and ran along the concrete corridor, stopping at a rusted metal panel built into the wall. He had noticed it earlier but dismissed it. Now he pressed against it, feeling a faint breeze. "A tunnel," he whispered. "Of course there's a tunnel." It took effort, but the panel finally gave way, swinging open to reveal a narrow cement hallway stretching deep under the mountain. Ranger rushed in first, paws echoing in rhythmic beats. Ethan followed, ducking slightly under the low ceiling. Behind them, footsteps clanged against the metal stairs. The intruders had found the entry. Their breaths echoed faintly. Predators closing in. Ethan sprinted deeper, praying the tunnel wasn't blocked. Ranger's growl echoed softly, urging him on. Then, blessedly, Ethan spotted a large steel gate ahead, connected to a dusty, old pneumatic generator on the wall. A machine from the 1940s, battered with age. He yanked the switch. The generator coughed, gasped, then roared to life in a tremor of shaking metal. The gate began sliding downward, slow, too slow. Ethan and Ranger slipped underneath just as the heavy steel slammed shut behind them. On the other side, the intruders' fists pounded against the metal. Their voices came muffled through the thickness. "Open it, now!" But the gate held, for now. Ethan leaned back against the wall, chest heaving. Ranger pressed close, his amber eyes reflecting the faint red emergency lights that flickered along the tunnel walls. Up ahead, the tunnel sloped upward toward the mountainside exit, and in that flicker of red, Ethan felt something inside him shift. Not fear, not desperation, but clarity. This wasn't a mystery he could outrun anymore. If someone wanted the truth buried, then the truth mattered, and he would not let Ranger face this fight alone. The tunnel released Ethan and Ranger onto a quiet ridge, lit only by the pale glow of early dawn. The fire from the night before had died down far behind them, leaving the mountains wrapped again in their blue-gray stillness. Ethan stood for a moment, hands braced against his knees, catching his breath as the first rim of sunlight bled over the horizon. Ranger hovered beside him, the German shepherd's chest rising and falling in steady, rhythmic breaths, amber eyes scanning the tree line for any movement. The dog's fur was streaked with dust and ash, and yet he held himself with the effortless poise of a creature built for endurance. Ethan straightened slowly, wiping sweat and dirt from his brow. The steel gate in the tunnel would hold for a short time, but not forever. Whoever those men were, they had resources and determination. He could no longer pretend this was simply an accident of inheritance. This was larger, older, and far more dangerous than a single vault or a forgotten ledger. "We need help," he whispered, and Ranger nudged his leg gently, as if agreeing. The only person Ethan could trust now lived nearly 5 states away, at the Pentagon itself, Daniel Harlow. Daniel had served with Ethan 25 years earlier in Iraq. Back then, Daniel had been a sharp-eyed intelligence officer. Slim build, wiry strength, brown hair often tucked beneath a patrol cap, and a perpetually serious face that rarely cracked a smile. He had the sort of presence that suggested sharp intellect, eyes that noticed every detail, a mind that assembled patterns faster than most men realized the patterns existed at all. A car bombing in Baghdad had scarred the left side of his jaw and left him with a slightly crooked smile, but it didn't diminish his precision or his loyalty. After leaving the battlefield, Daniel had climbed the ladder through Pentagon security analysis, becoming someone who understood both the nation's secrets and the weight they carried. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulled out his old satellite phone, scratched, dented, and still functioning, and dialed Daniel's encrypted number. The call connected after 4 long rings. A familiar voice answered, crisp and alert. "Ward, you alive?" "Barely," Ethan muttered. "Somebody's after me." and not amateurs. Daniel exhaled sharply. Tell me everything. Ethan explained, carefully, concisely, the vault, the gold, Operation Hearthstone, the intruders, and the pursuit through the burning forest. He described the ledger, the signature of Arthur Whitford, and the military-grade boot prints in his cabin. Daniel listened without interruption until Ethan finished. Then Daniel said quietly, "You need to move. Now. I'll notify the Treasury's Internal Security Division and a federal liaison, but you have to get me copies of everything. Photos, videos, the ledger scans, and don't send them by email or cloud. Too easy to intercept." "I'll bring them myself," Ethan replied. "Good," Daniel said. "And Ethan, this is going to be big. Don't get dead before you get here." Ethan allowed himself one small smile. "I'll try." Over the next 3 hours, he and Ranger made their way off the ridge, following old deer paths that twisted down toward a remote service road. Ethan found a spot with a weak but usable signal, uploaded encrypted videos of the vault, and placed everything else, copies of the ledger pages, photographs of every gold bar stamp, into a sealed metal case. By the time he reached Washington, D.C., dusk had fallen again. Daniel met him outside a secured administrative building, a tall, narrow structure with reflective windows and a slate-gray exterior. Daniel looked older than Ethan remembered, with deeper lines around his eyes and silver streaking the sides of his hair, but his posture remained firm. He shook Ethan's hand with a strong grip. "You look like hell." "You should see the other guys," Ethan said. Daniel's eyes moved to Ranger, who sat proudly at Ethan's side. "And this must be the famous Ranger." Ranger wagged his tail once, solemnly, as if acknowledging rank. Daniel took the evidence case with careful hands. "Let's get this classified, protected, and verified. We do everything by the book. If this is real, and I'm not saying it isn't, we're dealing with a missing chapter of history." The following days were a blur. Treasury officials flew in, analysts authenticated the gold, historians examined the ledger. The story broke through the media like lightning splitting a summer sky. Newspapers called it the Hidden Reserve, Whitford's Vault, the Mountain Gold Cover. The nation buzzed with disbelief, then awe, then pride. When the official investigation ended, the verdict stunned the public. Operation Hearthstone had been real. A secret, never-disclosed contingency plan. And Ethan, a solitary veteran with a rescue dog, had uncovered and protected one of the most important caches of national history. Ethan refused every financial reward offered. Instead, he accepted a modest compensation package meant for estate restoration and historical cooperation. He used the funds to build something no one else expected, a rehabilitation center in Asheville dedicated to veterans and working dogs. A place of quiet cabins, open fields, and trained counselors. A place where men and animals could heal together, away from the noise of the world. By late summer, the center opened its doors. Ethan spent his evenings on the wooden porch of his new office, watching Ranger rest beside him. The German shepherd's fur glowed warm under the fading sun, and his steady breathing filled the peaceful silence. Beyond the porch lay the long stretch of forest, the same woods that had chased them, hidden them, and witnessed truths buried for decades. Now, the golden light of sunset spilled across the trees as gently as water, transforming what had once been danger into quiet memory. Ethan watched the horizon and felt, perhaps for the first time in years, that he had come home. And somewhere within that vast mountain stillness, the legacy of what he uncovered continued to breathe, alive in every life he and Ranger would now help heal. In the end, Ethan realized the greatest treasure was never the gold hidden beneath the old house, but the quiet reminder that miracles rarely arrive with thunder and spectacle. They come softly, through the loyal presence of a dog who refuses to give up on us, through doors we never expected to open, and through the strength God places in our hearts when life feels too heavy to lift alone. He began to see how, in the rhythm of ordinary days, God speaks in the smallest ways, in the people we meet at just the right moment, in the burdens that shape our courage, and in the hardships that gently guide us toward the path we were meant to follow. Everything he discovered in those mountains felt less like coincidence and more like a nudge from above, a reminder that no story is beyond redemption and no life too broken to begin again. Ethan's journey became a quiet echo of a larger truth. Hope travels far, patiently, and always toward those who keep moving forward even when the road darkens. And sometimes, when we least expect it, God reveals that He has been walking with us the entire time. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a moment of hope today. Leave a comment to tell us what part stayed with you, and remember to subscribe so you don't miss the next story. May God bless you and your family, and may His gentle miracles follow you wherever you go.